thank you for coming back to my channel. It's been a little while since the last upload, so thank you for coming back. You'll see that in the video, my hair is actually longer, so it took me a while to get to editing, but I'm really excited to share with you my interview with Julina Guo. She has done wonderful work for immigrants through the Albany Law School, as well as with human rights down in New York City. She's also a first generation immigrant like myself. We both came over to the US when we were young. So we'll also talk about our Asian American heritage as well. So without further ado, here's the interview. Well, hi, Julina. Thank you so much for chatting with me today. You are a law person. I don't know how to say this. You're a a lawyer at the Albany Law School, and you work with Sarah Rogerson on the Immigration Law Clinic, right?
Yes, I did. So actually yesterday was my last day, but I have been there for 3 years, so I will miss it very much.
Wow, that's exciting that you're moving to a new job. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit later as well. But can we start by if you can just tell us a little bit about how you grew up? Because we kind of have similar background, right? Like I came to the US when I was 9. You also came to the US when you were young, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I was really excited to hear about our similarities. So I was born in Beijing, and my parents moved actually to Sweden when I was 4. So when I was, very young, we left China, and I never really grew up in the school system in China. So I left, and I lived in Sweden with them for 4 years. I went to elementary school there, and at first, I went to a Swedish elementary school, and then after 2 years, I went to an international school where I started learning more English and had more, diverse peers from really all across the world. And that was my first introduction to multiculturalism at a young age, and I remember that very well. So I am very thankful for that experience. So after 4 years in Sweden, we moved to New York City, and that's where I grew up for most of my life. So I did come here around 8 or 9 years old, just like you. And we lived in Queens for pretty much the whole time that we were in New York City, different neighborhoods in Queens. And again, growing up in a diverse environment with a lot of different friends from immigrant backgrounds, but also some not from immigrant backgrounds. And went to school, high school, and college there as well.
So how did you feel about moving around? Like, did you feel like you always knew your cultural identity at the time, or do you feel like it was harder? Like, did did your parents talk to you about race and like your heritage, or did you feel like it was more just wherever you live? And like, I don't know, I'm not really sure how to ask this question.
Yeah, it's a difficult question, and I think it's one that probably everyone in our, a lot of people in our community and background would grapple with growing up. I think my parents never explicitly, sat me down and talked to me about race or ethnic heritage or how I'm similar or different from my peers around me. But I know in Sweden, at least, my mom was very keen on having me practice my Chinese to make sure I didn't lose it. Because I was so young, and when you're that young, your brain is really wired for language. But if you go one route, then you might lose the other route if you don't practice it. So in the beginning, I was writing like very basic journal entries in Chinese, as a kid, so that I could continuously practice my Chinese. But I think, my parents wanted me to have that multicultural experience, and that's why they enrolled me in the international school. They wanted me to be able to learn English and have more opportunities. I think maybe America was always there. They were looking at America as a potential even back then, and especially New York City. But even as a kid, if your parents don't talk to you about race and your cultural background and how you might be perceived as different from others, you still feel that yourself internally from just societal forces and your peers around you. So I do remember one of my most vivid memories of Sweden is actually when my mom and I were in a supermarket a Swedish supermarket, just like, doing our regular grocery store shopping. And I distinctly remember that there were two Swedish boys who were probably about my age at the time, maybe like 5 or 6 or 7 years old, who like made fun of us for being different. So, I remember them saying like ching chong and looking at me and my mom. Not knowing anything about us, not knowing that I was going to a Swedish elementary school and that my parents were trying to do their best in this new country where they didn't know the language. And I didn't really process it at the time, but for some reason my brain just held on to that memory, to this day. And now I realize the significance of that. But it was, one of those experiences where even if your parents don't talk to you about it, you're acutely aware of it still because of external forces. So I don't know if my mom saw that or heard them say that or how she perceived it, or if later she thought maybe I should talk to her. I wonder how she felt or if she understood what happened. And maybe my mom just was not present at that particular time, but I was. And so that's something that I've carried with me, that memory.
Wow, yeah, I can definitely relate to that. I've had multiple memories like that as well. I think it happens everywhere. Sometimes we think about racism only in the context of the United States, but it's really true that it is everywhere. And like you said, like those kids are 5 or 6. I mean, they're not thinking, oh, I'm going to be purposely mean to these people. I think it's just sometimes they're young and haven't seen a lot of different people, and people do things that they feel like is even just funny or a joke, and they don't even think that it necessarily affects others in a negative way. um,
Yeah.
I mean, of course there are people who do that, but I think at such a young age it's hard to imagine that they really have that malicious
Yeah.
feeling. But yeah, I mean, I definitely remember experiences like that as well. And how was your transition to the United States, like to New York City? Do you remember that? And do you feel like there was a big culture change?
I feel like that period of my life was, I don't have as much memory about it for some reason. Maybe because it happened so fast, and I was, my mind was so busy grappling with, school and making new friends and adjusting to where we were living. But I do credit my parents for putting me in that, school where I was in Sweden, because when I came here, I did not have to go through ESL, for example. So I was enrolled in the regular class of students. I was in third grade. That's when I first came here, and I think I took an ESL test because we weren't sure about where I landed, and I ended up thankfully being able to enroll in the regular class, where I think it really promoted my growth a lot, and just being able to speak with others, and be with people who had lived here for generations, I think really kind of shaped me and my views on who I was and what it means to be an immigrant in America. So I find that part of my life to be a little bit, a little bit hazy, because I was in school and there was so much to be learning, and my parents were adjusting a lot with their new jobs, and I think that was the hardest part, is them kind of again going into a new country, now having to use English, instead of Swedish or Chinese, and then trying to find their career paths, which was so vastly different from what they studied, in Beijing as college students. So for me, I think looking back, the most unfortunate piece is probably that part, coming as an adult, and the brain drain of not being able to use your skill set and your degree from back home, which you studied really hard for, and to come here and not be able to use any of that because of language barriers, and because of the time in your life that you came. So looking back, I think that was the hardest part. But I think for me, I was quite fortunate to be here as a child, and very easily, I think relatively easily, being able to make friends and acclimate. And I liked my teachers, and quickly got into like Harry Potter and all those things that were popular at the time. So made a lot of friends through common interests.
Oh, that's wonderful. I think that's a very common first generation immigrant experience that my parents also had to go through. It's a lot of sacrifice. I think looking back as a kid, I didn't see that, but to sacrifice a whole life and relatives and connections to completely start over. And for your parents, they had to do it twice. So that's
Mhm.
very admirable.
It's very difficult, yeah.
Yeah. So how did you decide that you wanted to study law?
I think, I was thinking about my immigrant background and growing up, I went to school with the people who, like I mentioned, maybe grew up here or had parents who were immigrants. And I was always really interested in the process of how somebody physically moves, beyond borders and barriers and crosses into country lines, having done so a couple of times myself. So I started working, just volunteering with Chinese immigrants in high school, doing like very basic English classes that they were designed by me, so they weren't like real classes. But we would be in a nonprofit. It was at a nonprofit in Flushing. And every day I would have like a topic and a whiteboard where I would write some words down and we would go through those words and phrases together. So that's kind of how I started getting into the immigrant community outside of my own personal identity. And I really, really enjoyed that work. I found it to be very gratifying and rewarding. And I continued, volunteering there over the course of my high school trajectory. And during college is when I started working more with nonprofits that had a legal aspect. So I volunteered briefly with the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund in New York City. Was very aware of like voting rights issues and hate crime issues surrounding Asian Americans. I also was a little bit interested in like health disparities and language access and language barriers to like pharmacies and healthcare. So I was looking at all parts of immigration and the immigrant experience, but not really the law part. It was kind of like everything else about how immigrants live and can navigate the American system here, healthcare, voting, and all of that stuff. Um, but I've always thought that I wanted to go into law school, and after college, I was very deliberate in trying to find a role that at least would get me more exposure to immigration law, even if I wasn't a lawyer. So after law school, I worked for a year at Senator Gillibrand's office in New York, and I was the immigration constituent services liaison. So even though I wasn't a practicing attorney, my supervisors were attorneys, and we all worked in immigration, and I would be helping constituents of New York State navigate their immigration legal issues with federal immigration agencies. Not giving them legal advice, obviously, or anything like that, but that gave me a lot of exposure to the kinds of challenges that could arise in our immigration system and where the points were that could really bottleneck, applications or processes or families trying to reunite with one another. And so I carried that with me throughout law school and just try to remember that this is a complicated area of law. It's immensely complex, even for lawyers, even for me now. And having somebody who is not a lawyer, does not have a legal background, may not even speak proficient English, trying to navigate that on their own is very, very difficult. And their chances of success are so much higher if they have competent legal representation. So that's something that I've always tried to keep in mind. And I know that the immigration law clinic at Albany Law School is very much in the center of that too, where they make that a core mission and goal is to provide competent representation.
Yeah, that's such important work. I totally resonate with that. I have friends, who have immigrated here and they have all kinds of issues. And you're right, it's just absolutely complicated. I'm sure that it's been more complicated in the past administration with all the different laws changing. Do you see that immigration law has changed a lot over the few years, or do you see like there's a general trend towards a certain way, or does it kind of go back and forth?
Yeah, it's so challenging because it seems to go back and forth a lot, depending on the administration and the head of the various agencies, the secretaries of Department of Homeland Security and such. You're right. Under the Trump administration, it was very, very frustrating because it seemed like almost every week there would be a new directive from above to say to the heads of these agencies, listen, this is how we're going to adjudicate these cases from now on. And now you're going to be looking at one or two of these discrete issues that come up very often in these cases that were never problems before, but you're going to now focus on those. And if you see cases that have those factors, flag them and don't approve them.
Wow.
Yeah, so we've had a lot of cases in the immigration law clinic where, previously they were all approved with no issue, and lawfully so because we follow the law and these clients are eligible under the law. But under the Trump administration, we were getting rejection notices, we were getting requests for more information, requests for more evidence on the same types of cases that we used to file previously. And the Trump administration really walked back a lot in a lot of the humanitarian types of immigration status, making it harder for asylees to get status, making it harder for children who've been abused, neglected, or abandoned to get status. It was awful. So we were really fighting tooth and nail. I think everybody in this immigration legal community was fighting tooth and nail on every single case to make sure that there were as few bubbles that could percolate and as few red flags that they could really snatch and hold on to and give us a problem with. Now that we're in the Biden administration, we have seen some positive changes, at least in the trends, and we're hoping that it continues. So, there's talk about more of a comprehensive type of immigration reform in Congress and perhaps finding a pathway to legal status for many undocumented immigrants. Not immediately, but maybe through a process where it's a couple of years and they have to provide some sort of documentation and prove their residency and good moral character. But there's a process and a structure at least. So hoping that we'll see more news and development on that front, because so many of our clients are here, they're working, they're trying to support their families, they have no criminal record, they're escaping really terrible conditions and persecution in their home countries, and they just want to live and survive just like any other person. So I think there are signs of positive trends, and I'm hoping that will continue.
Yeah, that's really good news. I mean, when I first came to the US, I was in Tucson in Arizona, and that's like a place where many immigrants come in, whether it's from South America or from Mexico. And I don't know what it's like there now because I haven't been back for many years, but I can only imagine that there's just more immigrants coming through. Even when I was there were so many immigrants coming through, and you just see them as they're just families just like us, and they just want a better life. And it's just unfortunate that laws can sometimes work for certain people but not for others. And I think as lawyers, it's so important that you're fighting the good fight and representing the people who don't have a voice and don't have the skills or the know-how to navigate the system. That's so
Exactly.
important. Yeah. Wow. So I saw in your bio that you also have worked with human rights as well. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So I was working at the New York City Commission on Human Rights. CCHR is the acronym, and they are a New York City agency. We actually have a state agency too that's separate that works on similar issues. But the New York City agency enforces the New York City Human Rights Law, which is only specific to New York City, separate from the state law.
Wow.
And it's actually one of the broadest municipal laws in the country, I believe, on human rights. So it basically, my role there was to be a neutral investigator, but we would take complaints from anyone in New York City. It doesn't matter about their immigration status and nothing like that. We wouldn't even ask. But if they had a complaint about potential discrimination based on factors like race, ethnicity, age, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, even like source of income, if they had like a housing voucher, for example, Section 8, and the landlord didn't accept it, something like that. So, and those are just a few of the protected grounds. That the law goes into many, many more, which is really, really great. So I was there to take these complaints, meet with the complainants, draft complaints, issue them, and then start the investigation. So we'll be receiving documents from both sides, right? As the neutral investigator, you're communicating with both sides, and then interviewing different parties. Sometimes we subpoenaed different companies to give us records. Like I know I subpoenaed like T-Mobile, for example, to get phone records because we were trying to prove something about a person calling a complainant at a certain time. We wanted to link the phone number to the person. And if we were able to find that there was probable cause that discrimination did occur, then the case might even end up in court, in administrative court. So a lot of times we were able to get a settlement with the parties that they both agree to without having to go to court, but that would validate the complainant's experience and how they felt, the wrong that they felt, from that, but also be able to correct systemically something that went wrong in the company that did that, or the landlord or the employer. Maybe more sustained training for their employees that we would approve, the training materials of, and that they would have to report to us periodically to make sure that there were no other instances of this discrimination. And at times our complainants even were able to get fines. They were able to receive monetary awards, and because of probable cause that discrimination occurred. And if it was particularly egregious and the respondent didn't want to settle, then we went to court. So that was a really interesting experience too. I got to work with many immigrants who actually felt that they were discriminated against because they were they didn't disclose their immigration status, but I think some of them might have said that they were undocumented. And some of them were also even afraid to go to the court where we were because they were afraid that ICE might show up, and it was a government building. So, they were a little bit concerned about that. So we were very, very careful to say that ICE really has no place in these proceedings, and that ICE should not have a right to subpoena our records or get any access to our records because it's not related to their work. We're a city agency. And through that, we were able to gain more trust of our community. And now I know, they're doing a lot of outreach to the Asian American and the Asian immigrant community in New York City surrounding hate crimes. So they're a big advocate, and they would be the ones investigating, allegations of discrimination on the civil side, not criminally, of course, but on the civil side at least.
I see. Wow, that's really interesting. I never knew that there was a separate law just for New York City. Is that unique to New York City, or does this type of law have precedence in other cities as well?
That's a really great question. I don't know the answer to that. I think that would be a really interesting study.
Yeah, well, that sounds like awesome work that you did there, and really cool that they have that, and that's great. So you mentioned the hate crimes in the Asian community, which, I mean, unfortunately that's happening, but I guess the bright side is that the Asian American community is getting a lot more face time in the public view. So I can see that as a positive that came out of something very negative. And this month is Asian American Heritage Month. So I also want to pick your brain on your thoughts about that. As an Asian American, what do you think is the next steps, like both in terms of being advocates, being the voice and speaking about our own personal experiences, but also maybe organizing and participating politically?
Yeah, that is so important. I think we have to carry the momentum forward. And it's been a couple of weeks and a couple of months since, the Atlanta shootings, the murders there. And every day we're still seeing news, in San Francisco or New York or elsewhere in the country about instances against Asian Americans that I believe could be racially motivated. I know that many are still under investigation and the motive is not official, but It's really disheartening to see that headline every single day, sometimes multiple times a day. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. We shouldn't be complacent. We shouldn't be satisfied with the status quo, even with like politicians now speaking up about it and us gaining more media time on TV or on the radio. That's not enough. And I just don't want this issue to go away in mainstream media in a few months or in the summer. So I think we need to hold our political leaders accountable. Well, first, that starts with holding ourselves accountable, that we continue to discuss these issues and educate ourselves and our peers and our parents and our children in this community. And then to reach out and hope that our politicians who have come out to these various press conferences over the past few months, who have said they're going to do something and that they're keeping an eye on this issue, that they actually do that. And that if we can help them or inform them through that process, let's offer our help as the actual members of this community. So that I think is very important. And I also think there's probably various opinions even within our own community about these hate crimes. Some members of our community might not even consider them to be hate crimes. They might think that they're random acts of violence, that happen every day in large metropolitan cities. And there are random acts of violence that happen every day in those places, but then there are also specifically targeted, demographics who fall victim to those acts. So I think we also need to really be honest with one another in our own communities and have very candid discussions so that we can educate our peers, our elders and the children who we have, the people who are younger than us, and understand that this is a really important racial issue. We talk about immigration just now, and immigration is inherently a racial issue too. So we're never going to be divorced from the issue of race. And I think it's so important to be able to talk very candidly about race and ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, these things with people in your family. And I know that's very difficult sometimes in Asian immigrant
Sometimes
families.
it's harder in the family than outside of the family.
Exactly. That's the thing. It can be very uncomfortable, a little bit awkward, and a lot of the elders, I think, in this community may not know how to start those conversations or navigate. We, I think, don't have the vocabulary. I myself don't have the vocabulary in Chinese to be able to have a very serious conversation about this with my parents, for example. So it's something that we need to work on, and we need to find solidarity in our community so that we can carry this momentum forward and hold our politicians and ourselves accountable. So just, I think the most important thing, again, is to not feel complacent. Don't be satisfied with the status quo. Because the truth is that hate crimes against Asians have been occurring for decades, right? Not just in the past few months, not just in the past 4 years because of Trump. It's been happening. And now is our chance to really make a difference and have this issue be at the forefront, like you mentioned, keep our community accountable and keep our politicians accountable.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I echo that, sometimes when a march happens or there's a lot of momentum, and then after a while, then everybody goes home and it's like, okay, let's do something else now. But I definitely want to do what I can to keep the conversation going. And I've noticed too, like even within the AAPI, right, there's a huge diversity, not just in age, but also in income and from different countries, like countries of origin. So I'm really hoping to get more different AAPIs, coming together and talking. I think that will help just strengthen us and for us to understand each other, because I think sometimes there's misunderstandings within the AAPI as well.
Because we're so diverse, right?
Yeah. I mean, compared to some of the other minority groups, which may have more similar backgrounds. I mean, not necessarily, the same, but I think AAPI especially is very diverse.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. So what's next for you? So you're moving on to a new job?
Yes, so I'll be working for the state, and I'll be starting soon at the New York State Office of Children and Family Services. So I'm really excited about that opportunity, and they work a lot, as the name implies, with a lot of social welfare and child welfare programs and programs for families. So it's not immigration per se, because I won't be practicing immigration law daily like I did for the past few years now. But it's similar because it's a vulnerable group of our community. And in immigration, I actually worked probably the most clients I've had were kids who've been abused or neglected or abandoned by their parents.
Wow.
And some of them were in the foster care system too. So I'm hoping this translates or maps on at least somewhat to my new position, where I can use some of the skills that I've gained from directly representing them to kind of looking more broader at the structure and on the system as a whole. So I'm hoping to learn more when I start, and I'm sure that it'll be a learning curve for me to get into that field, but I'm very excited to see what I can do there.
Wow, that's really exciting. I was talking to Sarah earlier about this too, and it's so important to take care of the most vulnerable, and oftentimes they're children. Like I can't imagine, having kids who go through all this trauma and then they have to have immigration issues or, legal issues, and they don't understand, right? I mean, I don't know, like, for your clients, you're probably acting on their behalf, like in their best interest, but then do they really, like, they probably won't fully understand what happened, until years later.
Right. Yeah, just like I was as a kid, at that age, like I didn't fully understand a lot of the implications, of things going on around me, or like I mentioned, the incident with the two boys when I was young as well. But you're right. Like most of my clients have been, late teens or early 20s, and some have been younger teens. So it's so hard to imagine, how do you navigate all the cultural barriers and the language barriers in a new country, as well as this whole foreign legal map that is so complex for immigration attorneys, let alone, an average person, let alone, a child. So I really feel a lot for those folks and for their families and what they're going through. That's why I'm hoping that there's some kind of comprehensive reform that can not just help the children who have a path to status, but maybe also their caretakers and their family members who are here, their parents, who may not have such an easy path to relief.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I just want to thank you for all the good work you're doing and that you're going to do. I'm sure you're going to do so much more amazing work.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Do you have any suggestions or advice for young people who's interested to study law or who's interested in human rights or immigration? Where can you point them to learn more or to pursue this path?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is to not lose sight of your interests. If you are sincerely and deeply passionate about one area, for example, immigration, don't be deterred or discouraged from outside sources that say, that if you want to be a lawyer, you should only be this type of lawyer and not an immigration lawyer, or don't work at a nonprofit because it's not going to give you a lot of money. Work at a big private company where you can actually earn more. So don't be discouraged by talk like that. And they might come from your parents, your peers, even your classmates in law school, all the way as an adult, you'll hear this. But everyone has their own path. And if that's the path that your classmates would be happy choosing, then that's great. That's good for them, and they can start their careers that way. But if you want to start at a nonprofit or doing immigration law or housing or family law, that is a great path too. A lot of attorneys go through that, and they're successful at the end of the day. They're able to have a family. They're able to survive quite well. So I think don't be afraid to pursue your interests, even if it's not something that is considered traditionally prestigious or glamorous or high earning, because you are making such a big difference in the lives of your clients and the community. And please reach out to internships and mentors that you have. They're so important. I'm so grateful to all the mentors that I had, even as a high school kid, teaching English to this group of immigrants at a nonprofit. all throughout now, I've tried to keep in touch with as many, former supervisors or mentors that I had, not to just like check off the boxes, like I reached out to this person, I reached out to that person, but try to form genuine relationships with them. And they really care about you too. They want to see you succeed, and they want to know about your progress even after you leave, working with them. So don't be shy about continuing that connection and building that and letting it grow and blossom. So I would just say that, don't be afraid to pursue your interests, and speak with people in the field and mentors, and try to do as many internships as you can to gain more exposure. And then, you'll be successful and happy no matter what you do.
Awesome. Thank you. That's such good advice. It's so important for young people to hear that, because sometimes there's so many different voices that say you should do this or do this.
Yes, exactly. I'm sure you and I have been through that too.
Yeah. Well, I so appreciate you talking about the internships and the mentors too. I'm definitely big advocates for that, because those are extremely valuable. And I don't know how you feel about this, but for me, I think a lot of that is even more valuable than sitting in class sometimes.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely agree.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Julina. So great talking with you.
Thank you, Jen. I really appreciate it. It was my pleasure.
Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this interview. If you like this video, please hit the like button below and also hit the subscribe button so you see more interviews when they come out. Also, check out the resources I will be putting in the links below for some of the organizations that we talked about. Thank you again, and see you next time.